Hello and welcome. I'm Tracey Polowich, host of the Excellence Connection podcast, where we connect our listeners with subject matter experts, knowledge, and resources to help them along their excellence journey and improve organizational performance. Today, I have Santosh Patnaik with me, and Santosh is a strategic planner, organizational excellence specialist, and a certified balanced scorecard professional with over 16 years of experience driving improvement and excellence results for organizations. Today, we're going to speak about better utilization of resources. Welcome to the show, Santosh.
Thank you, Tracy. Thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure and look forward.
Well, thank you for agreeing to come on the show. I really appreciate that you are willing to be here and look forward to our discussion. Before we begin, can you give us a brief introduction of yourself and your background?
I'm a engineering by profession, done a master's in project management quite extensively. Much of my specialization has been into managing projects, then managing portfolios. I mean, at one point of time, I felt when I'm trying to manage portfolios, there was a bit of gap. I was not understanding what strategic initiatives are, what strategies, and also I felt, hey, this is time for me to do an MBA, did my MBA and all. Now, once I have done that, I have moved completely into the space of strategic management and its execution. So throughout my career, I have worked with top companies in UAE. All the 16 years have been in UAE with less than a year in India. All the firms that are quite big corporates here with more than 3,000 plus workforce here. It's a diverse culture. And I have been managing projects through project management. And the vertical that I used to manage is project controls, which is purely costing, planning, and scheduling. So it all deals with resources. How can we effectively use these resources on the project? So much of the focus has been on ensuring that the firm meets the productivity, of these resources. We ensure that they are used properly. So in the last 5 or 6 years odd, I have moved completely into the space of strategic planning, where much of the focus has been on how can we integrate people, process, and systems together so that can give a better competitive edge for companies. So I have my own consulting firm, and I have been doing a lot of projects on using, bringing in performance improvement projects. And I'm so lucky that, I have met Don and professionals like you. And yeah, that's what.
Yeah, I think it's great that you have spent so much time in your career in the United Arab Emirates. They really embrace excellence and quality improvement in all that they do. So it must be exciting to work with organizations that take that so seriously. Yeah. So you have a lot of experience as a cost controller and have delivered several successful projects in the UAE. And those have been focused on the implementation of management systems and processes and workflows. Can you describe for our listeners what is resource management and why is it so important?
So the resource management, we can say, it depends on the type of industry, but every industry operates purely based on resources, whether it is tangible or intangible. In simple terms, to talk about resource management, it's all about planning, scheduling, and allocation of resources to the right job at the right time. That's what is the key of the pure resource management. And one of the primary goals that I think we focus through resource management is maximizing efficiency and effectiveness. But having said, the key or the foundation to successful resource management is to proper budgeting of resources, either for a task, job, project, department, business unit, or whatever it is. What resources do we require? So in all of my experience, what I have understood is, yes, we all start with planning, scheduling, and allocation. But what do we plan without really understanding what has to be budgeted for? So once I know what is required, then I can plan, okay, fine, this is how my resources will be used, and then I can schedule them, and accordingly allocate them. It all depends on what we want to achieve, what are our goals, where do we want to head to, and how do we manage this gap. And allocating resources to the gap is the actual resource management, is what I would say. More or less, these resource management wouldn't be successful without a human capital as such, because all these resources are managed by the human capital. So, yes, it has been a very important part where organizations do not actually look into, but resource management is the crux, especially from the industries that I have worked in, are heavily machinery and people dependent. And we have seen enormous amount of challenges throughout, where improper management of these resources have led us to a lot of cost overruns.
So we traditionally think of assets and facilities and equipment and maybe information as those resources, but are there any other resources that organizations need to consider? And of course, the human resources. Are there any others that they need to consider with respect to their resource management and utilization plans?
In my experience, I think one of the key resources that organizations need to consider is one of the intangible assets, which the project management, PMI body, project management international body, or what all other bodies consider, is the organizational process asset, which is called as the OPA. This is very important. It is really an intangible asset, which people think, hey, it's a process. No, it's not a process. So that's very important, because every organization keeps a database of all the information and records of the previous executed projects. And this information, though stored in a central repository, are not properly used. But this information is actually called as the organizational process assets, which can be documents, templates, policies, procedures, plans, guidelines, lessons learned, the most important, historical data, earned value, estimating risk. So I think in addition to all the ones you have mentioned, organizational, process asset is the one of the key important resource that organizations should consider.
And how can they use that to help them with the utilization and plans for the other assets?
That's a very good question, because now we are purely talking about data. Now, this is all in the repository. When we keep saving files, what has happened on the project and all. So when we take into it, we know how we have executed our previous projects. This is what I meant by saying, what are our lessons learned when we finish one project. So from these lessons learned, we know effectively that where has been either an overutilization or an underutilization, or in par with what we have budgeted, the keyword budgeted. So based on this, we would be able to really plan for the future properly. So how do I plan for the future? Now, somebody 10 years ago has said, hey, you require X amount of machinery to do a particular job. But the technological trends, the advancement in the technology, or all these changes has brought in better resources in such a way that the jobs can be done much faster than the olden days. So do we not look back into how we have been productive enough by using those resources? That actually paves way for a better planning. So this is how we can use this in a better way.
That's very interesting, because we've all been involved in projects where we've done the lessons learned at the end, but where does that data go? And so it's a very good point that you make, that you need to look back at some of those projects, even if they're not completely related to what you're doing. There's maybe some lessons learned that could be applied in other contexts, right?
Yeah, just to add on to this point, most of the time, lessons learned are being taken just as a checkbox. Hey, this is what the policy demands. And we just all sit and then write, what are the lessons learned. But it just takes a day out of all the resources just to sit and say, hey, what can we take back from this session? Just it takes 8 hours of the key staff who have been involved in the project. Just take what, just sit and discuss, brainstorm. Hey, based on this, how can we bring in some changes to the, policies or procedures or whatever it is, so that way it helps helps a lot.
Yeah, and you almost need to make it the first step in the next project is reviewing lessons learned from before, right?
That's where you go. I mean, it's you have rightly said it. It's very important.
So I understand that there's different types of utilization of resources, such as billable and non-billable utilization and strategic utilization, and then overall resource utilization. Can you talk about these different types and how and where they would be applied?
Yeah, so these concepts that you have mentioned are very highly applicable in service-based organization, or where the human capital is also involved, not just with the non-human capital related aspects, because it's very tough to say that I would send a resource, let us suppose say an asset to you, which would serve, but if we do not know who is it going to serve and who is going to operate that asset, it becomes quite difficult. So much of the times it's all based on what we call it as the cost allocation base, is based on the human man-hours, not the machine man-hours. Because if the machine is not working properly, how do I allocate it? So again, coming back to the question, billable utilization is all that what is exactly used for that project. If I have a particular asset, whether whether it's an office space or whether it is any other non-human capital or even a human capital, these definitions hold good for any sort of resources. So the time, the amount of time that is directly used for the project is called as the billable utilization, which we can tell directly to the client, hey, this is what is a timesheet, or this is what number of hours we have used. Non-billable utilization is all the same resources that not have been allocated to a project, but probably indirectly allocated to a project. For example, I would say an process improvement project, or an trying to bring some organizational efficiency project within the company. This is not directly attributed to a project, right? But these are all those meetings that we do, brainstorming sessions. This is non-billable. So these are non-billable utilization. Strategic utilization resources are basically all those resources allocated to achieving that strategic initiatives that we run within an organization. It's not directly linked to a project, but having said, these strategic utilization is what is a very big game changer. These resources are what will actually bring in that, move us to the next step, which is called as the change agenda, move us from point A to point B. People do not really identify strategic utilization as the key aspect, but it's very important. But I wanted to add also one point in terms of non-billable utilization. It's a thumb rule that if the non-billable utilization of a particular resource increases more than the billable utilization of resources, it means the resources are highly unproductive. Either we are not able to effectively use them, or these resources are really not fit for the business. So, and it happens, in my experience, I have seen, either we hire machinery or we bring whatever it is, we see that they are lying idle, not being used. So a lot of unproductive hours, the overall resource utilization is all the time that, it's a life cycle. I have a person or a machinery, it can work for 360 hours without any maintenance. So that's called as, overall resource utilization. So we can use it for this many number of hours before it is put for a service, or we can use this many 40 hours per week, a person can be used. So that's what is overall resource utilization.
So what's an example of the strategic utilization? Like would the lessons learned, would that be an example of strategic utilization, or is there a better example?
A strategic planning exercise held at a firm on what to do in the next 5 years.
Okay. And so that
Yeah.
it helps to elevate the utilization of the resources and optimize them.
Overall resource optimization of the firm increases. So at the end of the day, the P&L increases, right? There are only two key goals. Customers should be happy, or I maximize the shareholder value. Both these go together, right? Now, let's be very honest enough. Both of these go together. And this is what these strategic utilizations actually, play a very vital role.
Right. Okay, great. And so you mentioned about the ratio between billable and non-billable utilization. Is there a benchmark around that organizations should strive for?
20 to 30%. It should not be more. I mean, it should be. It should be. Actually speaking, it holds good like a Pareto law. 20% of it should be non-billable and 80% should be billable utilization. Why did I say? And when we say the word 20%, now I'm talking based on actual data. Yeah. So if we say 20%, are you trying to say that the people that would say, hey, I'm paying $1 million for these resources. So you mean to say $200,000 is a waste of money? This is what is the actual data based on the actual data. So for some organizations like in the construction industry and all of this, it has gone up to 30%. Would you believe it is 30% is a maximum thing? At times when the market is not good, last 2 years, based on the survey that we have done, it's close to 70%.
Wow.
Non-billable. So, but it's a pandemic situation. We need not take, these are all, certain situations which we need not consider. But when it comes, it's to 20 to 30% is the real non-billable utilization.
Yeah. So understanding the ratio and understanding where you're sitting is really important to being able to manage that, I can imagine.
Yeah. So that's what is the key of all of this, how do we really manage resources? So much of the thing is, how do we manage resources? By really understanding what's the capacity of your resources, So there is no one rule of thumb which can say, this is an empirical formula or this is a methodological approach to say this is the capacity, right? It changes, as the resource ages, its capacity changes. I cannot be able to deliver the same amount of work like what I'm delivering today. After 10 years, I might be a little unproductive, right?
Yeah. So we tend to focus on resource optimization when the organization's demand for resources exceeds the resources currently available. But do organizations have an option for underutilization of resources? What strategies can be applied to optimize resources, such as a piece of specialized equipment or vacant facility space or office space?
So the way I would see, this is something again linked to what I have mentioned. I would like to use one word called as the hidden productivity or the hidden capacity. If I say I can do X amount of work, it's always, there's a buffer which I keep low myself. So I am for X plus Y. So I would say that plus Y is the hidden productivity, right? So I would always, whenever I have been working in the organizations, we always tend to plan in such a way that if we are looking for capacity X, we look for capacity X minus Y. You got my point. So that I can really motivate employees to deliver that real X capacity. So when we say underutilization, the moment I say I need a project, there is a project, I need resources, immediately we say we need to buy, right? There are here two key things that play. One, the pure concept of shared resource concept. Yeah, when I say a shared resource concept, even it can be the one which I hire. So people fail to really analyze, should I really buy this resource or should I really hire this resource? So actually what cash flows would it generate if I hire this resource, discounting it to the present day and then really looking at, whether it be a human or a non-human, people fail to do that. So I need a machinery, I need an office space, I need any other assets, I immediately go and buy it. but it's only for that moment. After that, it is unutilized. So one is the shared concept, and the other one is always buy for X minus. So that way you can reduce underutilization. So that's the only way. But can you completely avoid underutilization? No, I do not. We do not have any recipes like that.
That's a good point. And you talked about the billable and non-billable. So are there any strategies to proactively mobilize non-billable to billable capacity?
Non-billable to billable capacity, that generation of demand, though I have a capacity, the generation of demand is not in the hands, right? It purely depends on the market factors. So much of the time, I'm using a bit of financial things. If the inventory isn't moving out, yeah. So if it is just sitting, not being used, I would rather say go and sell those assets. You take the money and then put it into somewhere else where you can get some returns. So the same way, when there are assets we are not able to build it, I would rather say it's very tough to actually put it to, non-billable to billable, because what happens is overutilization happens. Now, if you require a simple example, if you require just, a car to drive to a place, but if I give you not just a car, but a fleet of cars. So obviously, there are a lot of resources at your disposal. You will use them left, right, and center. So it's not your mistake, because you have asked for some resource. I have given you X, saying that, hey, you choose whatever you want, because I have surplus. So I would rather say, do not give them. If they sit idle, they are dead. Their value falls down. So it's as well as you sell it off. And then, that is the only way. But I mean, but at least in my experience, I was never able to actually convert a non-billable into billable very efficiently. No.
So it's really about that interrelatedness between your strategic planning and understanding your market, and then matching your capacity and resources to the market demand and filling that gap, like you explained at the beginning.
Exactly. Yeah.
Are there any tips that you have for organizations who wish to get better at resource capacity planning and help them to analyze and bridge the capacity and demand gap before it becomes a challenge?
So rather than tips, I would say, what are some of the best practices, on how to actually do, I would say it as a best practices. First and the foremost thing is budgeting, which most of the organizations do not do. They just go, hey, we got a project, we need to deploy resources, we just deploy. No, you need to really budget what you really require for, So really understanding what sort of that level of resources required, that's the budgeting aspect. Then forecasting resource capacity versus demand doesn't actually help. When we do the second point is forecast resource capacity versus demand with respect to the timeline, not just as, so when are my resources going to get freed? When am I going to get a project? How can I occupy these resources? So timeline is the key. The third one is always look at the project's pipeline. This is very much important. Basically, the resource managers generally, whether be it human capital or non-human capital, they do not look into the pipeline. They always look at how do I make my resource work more effectively or efficiently. But I'm not looking at, hey, would I get an opportunity to put this resource for use? You got my point? So these are two different things. The first aspect is if I do not have an opportunity, I'm not going to talk about effectiveness or efficiency. That's gone. First I need an opportunity. So people have to look into the project pipeline, forecast overall in terms of what is the strategic resource utilization. This is more important. What sort of projects is the organization trying to take? What, direction is the organization going? If you align your resource capacity, calculating the capacity or forecasting the capacity with respect to your strategic initiatives, that really helps a lot. I mean, just for example, the one very good example is if I'm trying to focus into retail, suddenly I shouldn't be focusing on resource utilization that is helping the food industry. Right? I should be looking in more into retail, not into the food industry. It's not going to help me that way. And then design a process. This is the last, not the last, but the least. One of the key aspects is now I need a resource. Much of the time, in my experience, what I have seen is the resource request, the issue of resources, the return of resources, or the maintenance of these resources, or how we handle these. This is not at all recorded. People say, hey, there is a resource, just go and use it. Who uses it for what? How did they use it? If these are not properly recorded, then what lessons learned would we get from this? So these are my, 5 best practices that I would say are very much important for any organization.
That's fantastic. And you just touched a little bit there on the end about ways that data could be used. And that's my next question is, how can you have cited some of those examples of data that's not recorded, but so what can people be doing to record the data and then using that for future benefit?
That's a very good question. Whenever we talk about resource utilization and all, one of these advice, which I would say now as a tip for the companies is you cannot manage much of the things in Excel, right? People start managing things in Excel thinking that, we can make it quite complicated and do all of that. But there is a limitation to it. Because if somebody tampers something, your whole, Excel goes for a toss. So I would say whenever there is resource utilization, so optimization of those resources or how best we have used, where have we used, bit of automation is required. Hey, do we need to go for very big fancy ERPs? No, not required. There is a lot of low code out in the market, which simple SharePoint and all of this. There are so many platforms out there with a very nominal fee. We can get these things done where we make things automated. You know what? If somebody has requested, it's in the queue. These are all the requests that have to be cleared. So see, what is the beauty of it? Now, if I have 5 resources, but I have 6 requests for the same resource, now you are giving me in the upfront an information saying that, you know what, I will not wait for all the 5 resources to be issued and then only come for the 6th resource. I straight away route it to the procurement team saying that, hey, they need a resource. See, now, this is what helps. So who has requested? What urgency is it? When do they require it? All these aspects are really important to be recorded. Then how long did they use it? When did they return it? Because at the end of the day, who are the ones who are operating these non-human capital assets? It's the human capital, so they should be, I think we should be held responsible and accountable for what we are using, right? We know a particular task can be done in X hours, so we need to do it in X hours. That's what is our efficiency, I believe, right? So a bit of automation is required, which can actually help in doing any sort of analysis as such, So a simple automation would actually help companies.
I like that. And, really getting to understand what the resources are being used for and all the data around them, like how long and then you can really determine how to optimize them. Without that data, it's really difficult to make any good decisions, right?
Yeah. So here I also wanted to add one point, this recording of data, why technically in the past or even now, why this is not recorded or why it is not forced to be recorded properly is the reason is because the moment people start recording, there is a blame game, until unless we take out this blame game out from the equation, the cultural mindset has to be changed. The culture flows from top to bottom. The management should assure people that, hey, we are recording these to have better lessons learned, to do a proper utilization of resources, to do proper capacity calculation versus what the demand is available, and properly allocate. But the moment you ask, to record, I would actually feel that right the next moment that you are trying to police on me, that you would say, why haven't you achieved this? That that's what, so that's the reason. This is quite complex. I told you, this is not going to be so easy, but it's again the cultural mindset of the organization.
Yeah, and it's amazing how many times that culture facet comes back into everything that we do. So we can see some of the obvious results of suboptimal resource utilization, like wasted resources, expiry, scrap, excess costs, and too large of a factory, for example, or idle equipment. Are there any other consequences of poor resource management that people don't think about all the time?
It's all because of the one aspect, keyword, which I call here is the planning. Lack of planning is actually resulting in all of this. Because as I told you in the beginning, that you cannot avoid underutilization or overutilization of resources. For sure, there will be wasted efforts and all. The concept that I would always say is, something called as JIT. It's actually something, a lean concept called just in time. So the just in time concept is what will actually help companies to, allocate the right resource at the right time. So proper planning would actually help. And how would we achieve that? There is a famous gentleman called as Mr. Ballard. It's called as Mr. Ballard's last planner concept. So when we say what resources have to be utilized, we shouldn't be bossing out saying that, for effective utilization, that, hey, this is what resource you require. No, go to the floor level and ask them what resources do they require and how much do they require. So that way, planning has to come from bottom up. Planning doesn't come from top down. Planning has to come from bottom up. That way, it helps a lot.
I can see how that would help a lot. All the employees on the floor would know a lot more intimately what resources are required, right?
Yes.
I wanted to talk also about the interrelationship between resource management and sales. And so can you explain why there needs to be collaboration between these two departments or functions in an organization?
Now, this completely depends on the industry. Okay, I can say, well, it depends on the type of industry we are talking about. Yeah, because if we are talking about a complex industry like manufacturing, the sales team would never know on what resources are required to actually deliver that project because it's highly technical, right? So yes, much of the time people say that, the sales team and the resource team, there has to be a sync where to know what resources should be utilized or what is the pipeline. But most of the time, the sales team focuses more on getting a job, and how better I can. They say, hey, you know what? I got a job. Are we executing it or not? The first answer they would say is subcontract it. Give it to somebody else. Get it done. It is so tough for me to go to a client and bring it, So, but if you don't take it, they get upset. So I would say always in one of the firms that I have worked, the sales team, the moment they join the firm, they are put on the shop floor for at least a month. They go through all the departments. So they work 2 days in each and every department. They don't get onto the, area, to the market straight away. They work in each and every department. So this way, what happens is I do really understand the effort it takes from each of these departments in terms of resources. So that is the only way, or else it's a challenging thing, which even now I face. Much of when I go to my clients, they say, hey, why my sales team doesn't actually really focus on, so it's hard to answer. But
that sounds like a really great idea, and enabling those salespeople to really understand what it takes to make the products and where the capacities are and what all the resources are that go into everything. I can see that would really engage them in understanding from that perspective and would make them stronger at the sales position. And the other thing that I think you touched on is just really back to that strategic planning and knowing what it is that the organization wants to achieve from its strategic vision and everybody working towards that. And then automatically that sales and resource management teams are going to become more interrelated and interconnected, I guess, if they're working towards that common goal, right?
There's also one point, if the people are made to move around the organization, when they represent the firm in front of a prospect or a client, my level of confidence, because I know what my shop floor is, how my people work, I can present the firm in a much confident way. Now, I know really, what is happening currently? How many projects am I delivering now? Fine, we can take this. We can deliver in X number of days. You got my point? So that confidence really, kills the meeting there, and then the client thinks, hey, I should go with them. We shake hands and then we say happy days from here on.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. You mentioned about just in time, and I was reading recently something about after the pandemic. Now, there, a lot of organizations had over the past decades, pushed towards more efficiency with the just in time principle, and then they ended up kind of being caught, and that being detrimental to them with the pandemic and some shortages of supplies and resources. And now they're talking about finding a bit more of a balance with respect to just in time. Do you have any comments around that?
So technically, I would say it's a one-of-a-time event that has happened, right? It doesn't happen all the time. So be it any mathematical model, be it any financial model, whatever you do, models do get wrong because it's all the variables. Now, did we expect this variable? No. But I would actually like to even add to this, saying that people without the proper knowledge of how the just-in-time concept works, they straight away try to jump onto it, because if your process is not right within the firm, try to apply whatever be the concepts. You are not going to, achieve results. So I always say, people try to focus on efficiency, getting the just-in-time concept. I would say, forget about efficiency. Think about effectiveness. It's not about how many things you try to hit, or, out of 10, yeah, I tried, 8 shots. I was able to hit 8 shots. No, it's about out of these 8, were you able to hit properly 4 or 5? That's the right thing, So effectiveness, then it's about, again, the process. But I think people are adapting to it. But I think resource-dependent firms have really taken a very big hit again, So that's where, again, it invites a lot of automation. But then when we say automation, people think, hey, if it's automation, we are going to lose jobs. No, it's not that way. I think it's a misconception or the misunderstanding that, but it's eventually we need to run these automated platforms, right? So I think it's time would decide. It's very difficult to.
Absolutely, and we're always learning and improving and
Exactly.
Taking new information to make more improvements. So my last question for you, Santosh, is how do you remain in the growth zone? What do you do to deepen your growth mindset?
To be very frank, I just keep reading. I just keep reading because I believe in one thing: knowledge is wealth. Yeah. Now it's not about wealth. How much money do I earn? No, it's not that wealth. It's all about the amount of information, right? So I read a lot. The perspective has changed a lot since I have joined OEF. The community, organizational excellence community, where you get to read a lot of articles, lot of resources, try to meet out people and all of that. But again, it's more about trying to see how people are doing things in different industries. I think that's what is more important for every individual, rather than just focusing on what you're doing. Widen your horizons. Just try to look what is happening in other industries. What can we bring from there to this industry? that's what will help us in the growth mindset aspect.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much again, Santosh. It's been great to have you today and sharing your expertise and knowledge with our listeners. I really appreciate you taking the time.
It's my pleasure, Tracey, as always. And thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.